Okay, good evening, everyone. We welcome you to the Women in Neurosurgery, or WINS event on Data to Delivery, the Essentials of a Great Research Talk. Today, we are thrilled to have three senior medical students to share their expertise on crafting compelling research presentations and refining delivery techniques with the hope that you will apply these skills as you prepare for the 2025 Collaborative Neurosurgery DEI Symposium or other upcoming conferences. I am Güldamla Kalender, an event subcommittee member of the Women in Neurosurgery Medical Student Committee, and I will be moderating today's webinar. Before we get started, we invite you to join our WINS medical student roster and connect with us on social media. We have many exciting events planned before the end of the academic year, and we would love for you to stay engaged. Here is a brief look at tonight's agenda. We will start with introductions for our three fantastic speakers, followed by presentations on key topics, including a general introduction to presentations, how to present a poster, and tips for delivering an oral presentation. Next, we will open the floor for a Q&A session. Feel free to send your questions to Ellie Heineman in the chat at any time. Finally, we will wrap up with a few announcements before closing out the event. Now I'm excited to introduce our incredible speakers for tonight's session. First, we have Danielle Wishart, an MS4 at Duke University, who will be kicking things off with a general introduction to presentations. Next, Logan Musica, an MS4 from the University of Texas at Austin, will share valuable insights on how to present a poster effectively. Finally, Aidan Mendoza, an MS4 at the University of Southern California, will wrap things up with expert tips on delivering a compelling oral presentation. We are excited to have them here with us today, and their expertise will provide valuable guidance as we explore these essential presentation skills.
Okay, so hey guys, I'm Danielle. I'm actually from USC, so if you have questions about that, please let me know. But I'm going to get us started with just kind of the basics and make sure that everyone's kind of on the same page and knows what's going on before we dive into the more specific stuff. So first, we're just going to get started with kind of like what are the actual ways you can actually present research at a conference. And so the first one just being abstracts, and then there's posters and oral presentations. And we're really going to focus on the latter two just to make sure that you guys are really prepared kind of going into, I think some of you guys are presenting maybe for the first time or like you've only done a few presentations. So we're really going to focus on those two and make sure that you guys are good to go. And then just, why should we care about this? Why is presenting research important? And why should you guys be prepared kind of going into your presentations? I think for me, first and foremost, it's just a really great exercise in communication. Like you're going to have to communicate kind of throughout your career, and being able to communicate really difficult kind of scientific topics and distilling them down into specific kind of talking points is really hard to do. And it's really something that you guys need to kind of practice and get better at. And also, like, you're the main voice for your research, your lab, and your PI. Like, you're going to be the sole person up there presenting and answering questions. And it's really important to just be able to be prepared kind of going into that. It's also a great opportunity for feedback. There's going to be people who are probably experts in your field who are in the audience that you're presenting to or you're talking to when you're presenting your posters. And it's a great opportunity to kind of hear from them and see kind of things that you could do differently or get other ideas for different directions you can take your projects. And then I think something that's very top of mind for, Aidan, Logan, and I is that, we just submitted our rank list kind of yesterday, and in order to apply into neurosurgery, you need to kind of be doing research. You need to be presenting posters. You need to be getting oral presentations. You need research kind of in your repertoire when you're going to apply. And this is a really great opportunity to kind of start building that. So getting started, so first and foremost, where do you actually start when you actually, you got selected to do your poster presentation, or you got selected to do kind of an oral presentation? How do you even start? So for me, I actually like to start with kind of figuring out what's the actual requirements for the actual poster presentation. I've done this the opposite way, where I try and build a poster before actually looking at the requirements. I build it in the wrong dimensions, or I do it with the wrong sections and things like that. So make sure you're looking at the different things that you guys, the requirements that you guys have for the poster and the presentation. Is there a time limit? Is there a specific number of slides that you need? Is there poster size? Is there required sections that you need to have? So make sure you're looking at all of those. The next thing that you kind of need to make sure that you're doing is identifying the purpose of your project and the main conclusion. So this should be like a one-liner. The aim of my project is blank, and then the 1 to 2 takeaways from my project are blank and blank. It should be like one sentence, no more than that. This is a really great opportunity to kind of figuring out what you're actually, like the main thing that you're trying to build your sort of project around, or your paper around, or your poster around. And if you start from there, it'll actually be a lot easier to kind of build your poster or build your presentation. It's a lot harder to kind of distill down if you're going the other way. So start from there. The third thing that you're going to make sure that you're doing is choose a font and a theme that's very clean, very easy to read, and appropriate for a scientific audience. Neurosurgery is very conservative group. They are a very professional group, and so you don't want to stand out. This is not the time to kind of do some crazy theme or crazy fonts or make it fun. Just make it very clean and simple and easy to read. The next thing that I want you guys to make sure that you're doing is organizing your poster into very clear sections and your presentation into clear sections. I think Aiden and Logan are going to talk more about this. And lastly, I want you guys to make sure that you're reviewing all your projects with your PI and checking for any errors that you have, any typos that you have. Kind of go through it with them, see what they think, present to them, practice with them. If they have feedback for you guys, sort of take it and incorporate it. Next slide. Next, I just want to go through some kind of general advice for presenting. This is stuff that like I've kind of learned as I've kind of gone through this, and maybe mistakes that I've made and things that I would recommend that you guys pay attention to prior to presenting. So I think first and foremost, just making sure you know your research backwards and forwards. You should be prepared for like almost any question. You should know your data. You should know exactly what your project's on. It's not a great look if you kind of seem as though you just got slapped on as like the senior or the lead author on this paper or on this project. And so you want to make sure that you actually know what's going on and like know what your project is about. Kind of on that note, the next thing that you want to make sure that you're doing is know the background literature and how your project actually adds to the field. And this goes with knowing who's actually in your audience, because you could have someone who is an expert in the field, and you're going to kind of look a little bit silly if you don't actually know what the background literature kind of on your project is and what's actually already been done. Because a lot of people are going to have questions on how this actually adds to it and how this adds to the field and is adding to the literature. So just make sure you understand all of those kind of things going into it. The next thing is just making sure that when in doubt, just make sure you're succinct, you're to the point. If people have questions, they will ask questions. Make sure you're not getting lost in the weeds. You're just talking on the very highlights of your project and the things that you want to convey. That goes back to what are the aims of your project, and also it goes back to what are the conclusions of your project. Everything should come back to those two things, and just make sure that you're being very succinct. And the next, just making sure that you're practicing. Practice a million times. You should be able to wake up in the morning and do this presentation or talk about your project in any setting and doing it cold. You should not be struggling to talk kind of about your research that you've been working on. Specifically, if like you're introverted, you don't really like public speaking, there's lots of different strategies that you can kind of practice in order to get better at presenting. Something that I just want to give an example of something that I like to do. I'm not very introverted, but sometimes I don't like public speaking. So I actually do like box breathing basically. And so I will like take long, deep breaths out, make sure that I calm myself down before I go up on stage to present. And I think that can be really helpful. That's just one example, but there's lots of different examples of things like that that you guys can practice prior to presenting. And then next, unless you're told otherwise, make sure that you're wearing a suit. The suit should be black, gray, or blue. There should be no patterns, no harsh colors. If you're wearing a blouse underneath, it should be a neutral color. If you're wearing a shirt underneath for men, a neutral color. This is something I showed up to my first oral presentation wearing business casual because no one told me, and it didn't look great. So just make sure that you're wearing a suit unless other people tell you that there's other options that you should be wearing. And lastly, just make sure to congratulate yourself. This is a huge achievement to be able to present, and it's the first, hopefully, if this is your first presentation, this is just the first step of many. So I'm going to hand it over to Logan now, who's going to be talking about poster presentations.
Great, thanks, Danielle. So first off, congrats to getting to this point. If you have a poster, it doesn't matter if it's an e-poster, you have like an in-person poster session, or if you're writing a manuscript and you have the ability to make a poster off of that, it's a huge accomplishment and you should be proud of it. In terms of the essential sections that you need, title and authors, introduction, methods, results, conclusions. Some of my personal advice and pet peeves on these things. So for title and authors, always include your institutional logos. Use a high quality graphic, especially when it's printed out in person. When they blow up these giant posters and it's a low quality graphic, sometimes it's really obvious to tell that. For the introduction, doing a one-liner background and your research question. So big picture, what did we find and why do we care? For methods, just a simple flow diagram or concise explanation. Graphs and tables are always better than text. And then for conclusions, again, just driving home the point of why do we care about this finding? For design and formatting, I think dark text on light background or light text on dark background is the way to go. Don't overcomplicate it. Keep your elements well aligned, lots of white space. And then for font size, make sure it's really big and readable. We're a group of neurosurgeons walking through a poster session. No one's going to stop with a microscope and read every single word of your poster. We should be able to look at it and get the gist of why we care. For focus, also, I apologize for the background noise. I was in a case today, such as the life of a fourth year med student. But for focus of your poster, images are always better than text. Whatever figures that you can include or, large graphics, that's going to tell more of a story versus just words on a page. In terms of why we care, so major findings of your study, interesting findings, or how things relate to the clinical implications, those are all key. The finding that was statistically significant but actually not relevant to real life or not really answering your research question, you don't necessarily need to put every single thing that's in a table or a graph, or if you were in the stats and it was significant, not all that needs to go on there. It needs to be the high yield, important findings. So I have a relatively embarrassing example of a poster presentation for you on this next slide. This was my first try, I think, ever at making a poster. And I think it just goes to show, being smart and successful and achieving things in neurosurgery doesn't mean you know how to make a poster well. It's a skill that we all need to work at. So I'm just going to tear apart my first attempt at a poster real quick. So just looking at this right off the bat, way too many words. I have paragraphs, I have sentences. Nobody is going to want to stop and read all that. My friends did because they were supportive, but otherwise it was a lot. Bullet points, few words, main ideas. I don't look at this and I don't see like, what is this about and why do we care? Something about ceiling fans. I see a little picture of ceiling fans. You can advance the slide. Yeah. So number one, way too many words. Number two, there's irrelevant data. Like we don't need all the percentages of every single statistic that we ran. Really only the high yield pertinent findings are key here. Last thing. So the main focus of the paper were ceiling fan related head injuries. And so when you present a poster, you need that big crux, like what was the thing that we found that's adding to the literature, make that the center of attention on your on your poster, right in the middle, large, readable, clear. So I've learned a lot since then. And so here's some examples of other poster presentation types and kind of how to tailor to these. So this next slide, you can see if you have like an in-person poster session, sometimes, usually nowadays, I've noticed that these tend to be in the basic sciences. A lot of the conferences are moving away from doing in-person paper posters for kind of clinical research projects. Personally, I'm not a fan of that. I love a good poster session. I think we work hard on these projects, and actually getting to walk around a gallery and read each other's work is really useful. So in the basic sciences is where we see this more so. But for these, something important to know is you should have your elevator pitch ready of why did I do this? Why do we care? How does this add to the literature and what we found? Get ready to walk your audience through step by step, and also be sure to tailor to the level of understanding of the person who walked up to your poster. If it's the PI of your project who's bringing one of their friends in neurosurgery over, you don't want to start off the project talking about, well, brain tumors are blah, 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 blah. You want to start, okay, so this study was on IDH mutant astrocytomas. You kind of have to read your audience and gauge their level of understanding of what you're talking about. And then also just kind of some elements of the poster to focus on. If you advance the slide, you can see like large images, text that's, bolded where it's relevant, arrows pointing to sequential events to where someone could walk up and look at your poster and understand it without you standing there. So another example of a poster presentation type is if you have an e-poster. That's what most of the big neurosurgery societies are turning towards. So AANS, CNS, Spine Summit, all of these conferences tend to, if you get a poster accepted, it's usually an e-poster. I still think it's something to be proud of, something to take seriously. And in some ways it has more of a permanence because anyone can go and look online and find your poster after the conference and during the conference. So making sure you have quality work on there is going to be really important. My advice here is include your email on the poster because you're probably not going to be there where somebody can ask you questions, but if someone's particularly interested in it or has a follow-up question about your work, you want to make sure they can communicate with you. And then also a way to kind of get the word out there and, get some credit for doing it is taking a picture and sharing on social media. I don't think there's any shame in that. I think we should be, proud of what we're adding to the field of neurosurgery. And then you can just see zoomed in. Oh, sorry. No, that one's not zoomed in. My bad. Next one. So one thing that I've noticed is given all of neurosurgery's kind of emphasis on more digital and e-poster formats is they're doing the same thing for manuscripts. So when you get a published manuscript, in addition to it being published in a journal, a lot of these are starting to have like what's called digital abstracts or visual abstracts for the manuscript. So I wanted to touch on that as well. This is slightly different from a poster in that we're mostly focused on what this adds to a literature. So a little less background and a little more on your key takeaways. Make sure to have very readable figures and then symbols when applicable to kind of differentiate. So this is already, a published paper, results are significant. What is unique about this project that, makes it worthy of being read or worthy of being in this journal? That someone could just quickly look at it and be like, oh, is this something I'm interested in? So this is an example of one that I just made for a project where you can kind of look at it and you're like, oh, I see little gender symbols. Okay, this must be gender and neurosurgery. And then like, oh, it's talking about the neurosurgical match rates and things like that. So that's my advice. I've learned a lot kind of through trial and error in doing posters. So happy to answer further questions if people have them.
Excellent. Thanks, Logan. So I'll talk a little bit now about kind of the strategy for oral presentations. I'll give an example. I won't belabor you all with the whole thing, but we can kind of talk through the format and see what things look like. Some general tips for strategies to obtaining oral presentations. It's certainly difficult, but definitely looked upon favorably as a medical student. I think one thing that you can do certainly is try to identify, a good PI that will allow you to do good work, take a project to the end, submit early, try to write the abstract in such a way that, it appears high impact. Definitely seek feedback from your mentor, from residents, from other people who have had abstracts accepted for oral presentation. And then I think you can be strategic about where you submit the abstracts to, right? So certainly if you have a state or regional neurosurgical society like the, California Neurosurgical Society of the Virginias or something like that, if there's a subspecialty area of interest like the tumor section, the peds section, NASBIS, and then also if you're interested in niche research topics, right? So if you're doing research on extracellular vesicles or something, I'm sure there's an extracellular vesicle conference that you can find to submit your abstract to. And then great places to practice, if there's a med school research symposium, obviously the WIN symposium that's coming up that many of you will be presenting at. And then if your department, your home department offers a grand round, sometimes students have the ability to speak there. You can certainly watch visiting sub-Is kind of give their oral presentations as well, which can be a great kind of example to have. And then I'll just state that, many of your faculty mentors are reviewing abstracts for these conferences. Certainly, I'm sure they would be willing to offload some of that work to you as a student. It's great to see kind of what gets submitted and kind of develop your kind of ethos for that. Next slide. So as far as creating oral presentations, you basically want to stay on time. That should be your main goal. If you can get in and out and under the allotted time slot, you are, a gift to mankind. And I think that especially goes for your sub-I talks, but then in general, for these oral presentations where there's 10 people, you might be sandwiched in between, the chair of a department somewhere and, a resident. Don't be the person who gives a 15-minute talk in a 10-minute time slot, and then everybody's there for a cumulative extra half hour as a result of that. Beyond that, it's a talk, right? I think you should try to be an engaging speaker, and part of that means similar to reducing the text on your posters, reduce the amount of text on that slide, pictures, animations, all those things that will help people to kind of engage with what you're doing. I think Danielle touched on this a little bit, but you can look at having a sans serif font, so fonts that are easier to read, and there should be a picture that pops up of what that looks like. And then beyond that, you should know your talk cold, right? Can you give the talk without slides? And I would focus on practicing once you've generated a good talk and gotten feedback on, should I include this slide or not from your mentor, from other kind of colleagues. Practice without your slides, right? Like you should be able to kind of step through the presentation in your head, and that's going to minimize those those filler words, even if you need to go a little bit slower. Being slow will enable you to be more smooth and you'll be able to give a better presentation. So now I'll step through my presentation here. And so this was a quick 3-minute presentation that I gave at the Southern Neurosurgical Society conference on combination lit and immunotherapy. Obviously had a short time period. So, typically I have a disclosure slide. I have no disclosures, but other people did. You can have a summary slide or not. I think really depends on, whether it's actually adding something to the structure of your talk. If you're using it to kind of let people know where you're at and you're going to reference back to it, I think it's useful. So, this talk really, we're trying to find, we know that lit opens the blood-brain barrier and the blood-tumor barrier. Lit could also theoretically result in an in situ or a systemic anti-tumor immune response. And so the question really arises, at which times for which tumors and in which therapies are we likely to see benefit? So we generated a preclinical model of lit where we go back in to or we implant a tumor, we go back in and we ablate the tumor and we follow animals over time for a variety of different endpoints. Those are what the surgeries look like. We implant a laser fiber and a thermocouple probe. We're able to do this because we have preoperative imaging on those animals. We set out to prove that lit was feasible, and we show that it can cytoreduce the tumor there on post-lit MRI as well as on H&E. You get the stereotypical histopathologic pattern. We did get the tumors up to a hyperthermic temperature, and that's associated with an increase in survival. We also proved this in a separate model using bioluminescence. When we combine lit and immunotherapy, interestingly, we find that checkpoint blockade, which is kind of historically been used in clinical trials, has shown to have also fails in this context. But when we combine with 4-1BB therapy, which enhances T cell memory and longevity, we get an enhanced overall survival. So the question remains, which portions of the nervous system, whether that's in situ response or kind of glial lymphatics, are most important here? So in conclusion, modeling lit is feasible. Lit and 4-1BB combine to enhance survival, and studies are ongoing to identify the necessary compartments for response. So that's kind of a general approach to a talk there. And I think, again, ways to be efficient with what you're saying, knowing what you're going to say ahead of time. That's what's going to get you points on the stage. And I think, again, really focusing on staying within time and giving concise information while being an engaging speaker will help you a lot. Happy to take any questions.